Our series on the Gospel of Mark brings us today to the final chapter of the story, the resurrection. Sort of. I mean, we all know the story of Easter. The ground shakes, the stone is rolled back, the angels appear, and Jesus shows up in a physical but not exactly physical form. Resurrection. But most of that happens in the other three Gospels. That's not how the Gospel of Mark tells the story. Because the Easter story is so familiar, when we read Mark's version, most of us tend to fill in the missing pieces with what we know from the other Gospels, and that's fine. But it's also true that so far we've seen that the writer of the Gospel of Mark is usually quite intentional in their storytelling. Mark is written from a particular perspective, to a particular audience, with a particular meaning. And we'll do well to pay attention to the particulars. To help us get into that this morning, I'm going to invite us to walk through the final chapter of Mark as a guided meditation in a few minutes. Before we do that, I want to point out a couple of the unique pieces of Mark's way of telling the Easter story. As usual, a hat tip to Alexander Shia for pointing those out in his book, Heart and Mind. First of all, the angel at the tomb, or rather, the lack of an angel. Matthew and Luke give very impressive descriptions of dazzling, otherworldly messengers. But Mark is much more vague. A young person sitting inside the tomb, wearing a white robe. Technically, that would fit the description of what most people think of as an angel then and now. But if Mark wanted to tell us that there was an angel, there were much more direct ways to do that. For some reason, Mark is downplaying the angel thing. I wonder if the gospel is hinting that the resurrection was somehow less otherworldly, less supernatural. Still awesome, full of wonder and power, but perhaps not as far removed from the ordinary natural world as we might picture it. Or maybe Mark is emphasizing the uncertainty that faced these women as witnesses. What if there was no clearly divine messenger, just a young stranger with a story? Why should they believe that person? Where's the proof? And that's the second unusual thing about Mark's resurrection story. There is no proof. The youth tells them that Jesus is risen, that he got up, but they are offered no evidence of a resurrection. There isn't an earthquake, not even any discarded linens in the grave. The gospel ends before anyone goes looking for Jesus, and Jesus doesn't appear on his own. After all the promises in Mark that they would never be alone, in the end, Jesus doesn't show up. All they have is the empty tomb and the word of the young stranger, telling them that Jesus is risen and is going ahead of them to Galilee. If they want to see Jesus, they're going to have to go looking for him. And that's a third unique thing. Jesus doesn't meet his followers where they are in Jerusalem. Instead, the messenger tells them that Jesus is going ahead of them to Galilee. Galilee, as in the Sea of Galilee. The sea that Mark describes Jesus going back and forth across in his gospel, the sea where all the storms are. As Shia puts it, Mark pointedly directs the disciples to see their risen Messiah in the place he has used in his gospel as the metaphorical locale for chaos and wilderness. Here on Easter, at the moment of triumph, the first thing that the risen Christ does is call his followers back into the storm. That's where they'll find him. With all of that in mind, the stranger, the lack of evidence, the invitation back into the storm, it's no wonder that the woman fled the scene in terror and confusion. That's where the gospel ends. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. That's it. That's the conclusion to Mark's journey. No appearances of the risen Christ, no forgiveness or blessing. no promises, no ascension, just the word of a stranger, an abandoned set of instructions, and overwhelming fear. Now, if you will look up in Mark chapter 16 in a Bible, you'll see that there are more verses after verse 8. Bible scholars almost universally agree that the original writing ended here with verse 8, but some editor or group later added a short concluding statement. And some other editor or group tacked on a longer ending, 12 more verses that include several appearances of Jesus and familiar versions of the Great Commissioning and the Ascension. There's nothing scandalous going on here. That's the way the scriptures often worked. Mark 16 pulls back the curtain a little bit on a book that came together far more organically than it would appear in our modern print editions. But in this case, it is clear which pieces were added and which was the original text. And it's also fairly obvious to me why someone would want to add on a proper conclusion, why they would want to end on a more positive note. Mark's original version is unsettling. Doesn't feel like Easter. But after everything we've read in Mark's gospel about storms and suffering, the threats facing Jesus and his disciples, the ongoing persecution of the Christians in Rome to whom Mark has written, with so much uncertainty and pain in the air, confusion and fear seem like an honest place to land. The storms don't end after Easter. Not for the disciples, not for the Christ followers in Rome, not for us. So that's the background. I know it's a bit dark, but like the rest of Mark's gospel, I think there is a clear path to hope running through it. To get on that path, I invite us to join in the story through a guided meditation. We're going to take about 10 minutes to walk through the story. I would suggest that you turn off your camera if you haven't already and get comfortable. I will give instructions out loud throughout, and I will have some images on the screen as well, but if you want to turn off your screen and just listen, that would be good as well. Let's begin. Feel free to get your body into a relaxed, comfortable position. Perhaps close your eyes or allow your gaze to soften. Let's begin with a few deep breaths, paying attention to the air moving in and out of your airways, your lungs rising and falling as we quiet ourselves and move into the story. The story begins with 3 women preparing for a difficult day. They wake up with a task on their mind, a place to go, and a duty to perform. If you want, you might imagine yourself as one of those women, walking with them, experiencing what they experience at the grave of their friend and teacher. Or maybe you'd like to focus on something from your own experience, a problem that you're working on, a weight that you're carrying, something you feel obligated to do. Perhaps this scripture can be a guide to you on your own journey of anxiety, grief, surprise, fear. So you can choose to imagine yourself with the women in the story, or to think about your own situation and what that feels like. I'll give you a moment to decide. When the Sabbath was over, Mary of Magdala, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought perfumed oils so that they could anoint Jesus. Very early, just after sunrise on the first day of the week, they went to the tomb. They were saying to one another, "Who will roll back the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" Picture that walk to the tomb, or the journey to the place of reckoning in the situation you're thinking of. What are the surroundings like on the way? Who is walking with you? What are you carrying? What do you feel like on this journey? Maybe you're hurrying, maybe hesitating, maybe glad to be doing something after a time of waiting and watching. What do you think is going to happen when you get there? What do you want to happen? What do you dread might happen? As they came to the tomb, when they looked, they found that the huge stone had been rolled back. On entering the tomb, they saw a young person sitting at the right, dressed in a white robe. They were very frightened, but the youth reassured them, "Do not be amazed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, the one who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him." Well, that turned quickly. A messenger telling you that things have gone very, very differently than you had expected them to. Look around. What stands out to you about the scene around you in this moment of surprise? What does the surprise do in your body? Does your heart speed up? Maybe your muscles tense? Maybe your gut starts to churn? Where does this surprise land within you? Take another look around. The tomb is empty. The person you thought you would find is not there at all. That could mean so many things. Does it mean that you're not going to get what you expected or hoped? Is this the emptiness of loss? Or does the emptiness offer space, room for possibility, maybe even space for something better than you had dared to imagine? Or maybe it's both loss and possibility happening at the same time. They saw a young person sitting at the right, dressed in a white robe, who said to them, "You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, the one who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. Now go, tell the disciples and Peter, Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee, where you will see him just as he told you." Beyond the empty tomb, the presence of this young messenger is also unexpected. Who is the young person in the scene you're picturing? Is it someone familiar? Is it a stranger? What is your reaction to their unexpected presence? Are you inclined to trust them, or do you want to resist? What message does this young person have for you? Are they asking you to do something? How do you feel about that task? In the story, the message directs Jesus' followers back to Galilee, the sea of storms. What would a journey like that mean for you? On hearing the words of the messenger, they made their way out and fled from the tomb, bewildered and trembling. But they said nothing, for they were afraid. There it is. A brief encounter that promises, maybe threatens, to change everything. As you move away, how are you feeling now that the moment is past? How do you feel about what you've been asked to do? Will you also be silent? What is it that you don't want to say out loud? If you, like the women at the tomb, are feeling astounded, overwhelmed, anxious, afraid, there is space for that. In this moment, whatever you feel, hear that you are accepted and known. You are still a part of this story, and the story is still a part of you. You can't run away from it, and it won't leave you behind. Your experience, your feelings, even your failure to trust, your failure to hope, even your silence has a place in this story. Your experiences and your feelings do not negate who you are. Jesus is still calling you to be with Him. You still belong by His side. You still have work to do. You still have a purpose in God's story. Fearful or not, faithful or not, the next step is yours. What will you do? As we begin to come out of this meditation, take a few more deep breaths. And let's close this time with a prayer. Creator God, in this story of the gospel of Jesus Christ, you have shown yourself to us. You are the God who meets us on our journey, who knows our potential and our pain. You are the God of the storm, who keeps calling us to deeper faith, deeper trust, to deeper knowledge of the love that will not let us go. Here at the empty tomb, with the cross behind us and before us, we have mixed emotions. Some of us are elated and eager to move forward. Some of us are suspicious and defensive. Some of us are tearful and frightened. Many of us are all of those things and more. As we go from this place, confirm within us that you go behind us and before us and beside us on our journey, come what may, as we walk in the way of Jesus. Amen.